Welcome here to the Melissa's Kitchen. Today our guest is my good friend for several years in the food industry, Michelle Dudash. But let me tell you a little bit about her. I hold her book, Clean Eating for Busy Families. It's a revised and expanded copy that just came out this year. It's a copy that you guys should all have. Now, Michelle is an award-winning dietary nutritionalist, a Cordon Bleu-certified chef, and an author of a top-selling cookbook. Through her company, Chef Dudash Nutrition, Michelle is a food and nutrition writer, recipe developer, TV personality, and national nutrition and culinary spokesperson, as well as her own and her she's also a web show host. Excuse me. She's a regular contributor to the popular 8-year running Dish with Dudash recipe column in the Arizona Republic, the Food Network's Healthy Eats, Men's Journal. Additionally, she has written for Today's Dietitian, Eating Well, Diabetic Living, Shape, Self, Parents. I can go on and on. She's appeared upon the Rachel Rate Show, The Doctors, The Chew, The List, Cheddar Business, ABC, LA. There's not a publication she hasn't worked with or for or contributed to. So proud to have her as my friend, and finally here in Los Angeles to join us in the Melissa's Kitchen. And finally, she now resides, even though many think that she still lives in Arizona because she does the TV shows there. She lives with her family, her husband and 2 daughters in Carmel, Indiana.
Yes.
So my guest today here, talking about her exciting book, Michelle Dudash.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, so before I moved to Carmel, Indiana, I always said Carmel. I was like, I'm calling it Carmel. And then I realized, no, do not call it Carmel when you are in Carmel, Indiana. Anyway, so I'm really excited to be here because, I love this book. So these are my daughters on the cover, by the way. Scarlett and Stella. This is actually in my home kitchen in Indiana. When you live in Indiana, you get there's wide open spaces in Indiana. So I designed this kitchen with TV and video in mind, and then we got to shoot the cover there, so it was really fun. But I love working with Robert. So some of you saw that Maleficent video that we did earlier. I love how. Yeah, we met at the PMA Fresh Summit about 5 years ago. And then just since then, he'll just send me some, interesting ingredients, and the freaky fruits inspired. Well, actually, I was Maleficent first for Halloween. And then I was like, wait a minute, I have these freaky fruits here. And I'm all dressed up. And oh my gosh, I need to do a Facebook Live right now. And that's kind of where it all started. And then it turned into a TV segment and all of that. So it's a lot of fun. But I love how he just kind of sends the amazing produce and we do our thing with it. So my food story growing up, I grew up in Wisconsin in a small town called Fond du Lac. And I grew up, my grandmother had this huge garden. And I spent a lot of time growing up with my grandmother, actually. And that's where I learned how to make how to make pies when I was 8 years old. So it kind of started from there. We would pick the tomatoes, pick the cucumbers, pick the berries. And she taught me how to roll out pies around the age of 8. So that's where it all started. But I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to do. I knew I was good in math. So the librarian told me to become an actuarian. I didn't actually know what that meant, but I did claim that as a degree at University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I went to school. But when it was time to pick classes for college for freshman year, my grandma said, well, why don't you take a nutrition class, because that's all you ever talk about. So I took a basic nutrition class, and from there, it was love at first sight. I changed my major, thankfully, for me, first semester in college. And then I started, I was working in the restaurant business since the age of 14. So I worked in restaurants all through college. And after I graduated, I went into food service for Compass Group Chartwells, moved to Arizona. And from there, I fell in love with the culinary side. I was tasting, that was the first time I was exposed to like a bordelaise sauce. And I was like, wow, how did they make this sauce? So I was reading gourmet magazines. I was reading cookbooks as like they were novels. And before I knew it, I was driving to Scottsdale to go to culinary school, and I was signed up all of a sudden, and magically I was enrolled in culinary school, and that's how I ended up in Scottsdale. So from there, I cooked in fine dining at Mary Lane's. I was a private chef for a wealthy family in Paradise Valley, Arizona. And actually, a lot of this book, the inspiration, I wrote every single recipe in this book. And in the head notes and the intros, I have little stories like where they all came from. So the chicken Parmesan that you enjoyed today, that was when I was a private chef. She wanted light food. I cooked for Prince Andrew on their porch once. It was an interesting life. We'd go to Cabo, cooked for food for the private jet. It was like a really amazing experience. And then I became a personal chef. I wanted to start my own business. So that's where it kind of all stemmed from. My first TV segment, I was terrified. My knees were bouncing up and down. My lips were quivering. And they thought I was the food stylist, not the talent. Because I think I rolled in kitchen clogs and a black t-shirt. We don't wear black in television. You wear bright colors, but I had no idea. I think my hair was pulled back. I definitely did not have enough makeup on for television, but I realized I loved it. So I combined all of those things, and that's where I kind of just ended up here today. So what I do in my business, which is writing for the media, writing for food companies, writing recipes. I love, in my cooking as a private chef, I had 2 hours to make amazing entree salads. I would spend literally 2 hours. They wanted entree salads because they wanted to be healthy for dinner. So that would be a weeknight meal. It would take me 2 hours. But then after I had my baby, and I was I did not know what hit me. I actually had never babysat before even having children. And I was like, I can't spend 2 hours making dinner anymore. So I took my recipes that I would, that were a little more elaborate, and I streamlined them way back. It just hit me. I specifically remember I was in the kitchen and I just had this flood of recipes. I wrote them all down in a notebook, threw a chicken curry recipe in the slow cooker, and that's really where that really is where it was born, when my daughter was an infant. So from there, this is actually the first cover, by the way. I think it's fun to look back. So the first edition, so notice there's only one child. Thank goodness my publisher gave me a second edition. Woo, Stella got checked off the list. You got a book cover, honey. Love you. But this is, actually, we shot this in my food stylist for the book kitchen. And Scarlett was there. She's propped on a huge stack of cookbooks just to be tall enough to see over the counter. And that was the first edition. So then about a year and a half ago, my publisher, clean eating is still so relevant. If you look in Google Trends, I love Google Trends. I don't know if you like to look in there, but it's still so relevant. And it's actually interesting. You'll see this huge spike in Google Trends. It's like a heart monitor, and it's January. That is when everything is surging. People are searching for clean eating. So what is clean eating? That is a question, of course, I get all the time. Clean eating, at its most basic foundation, is choosing foods in their least processed state. So closer to their more natural state, all right? Now, you can go really deep into clean eating, right? But that is really the basic foundation. So, and the other thing I think is, now, of course, local when possible. Looking at, and when you do eat packaged foods, looking at simple ingredient lists. And I think that's really important, especially as a busy person trying to get dinners on the table or lunches, food on the table. It's okay to use packaged foods, right? Most foods are processed in some shape or form, right? Unless you pluck that apple right off the tree, the food is processed in some way. Produce is washed. Maybe it's peeled. Maybe it's so I don't see process as a negative thing. I see it as it's a continuum. All food falls on a continuum. But as a dietitian, what I'm looking at is what was done to the food, right? So basically, I'm looking at, was anything taken out of the food? Was anything removed? Was anything added? So to me, clean eating is, it doesn't have a lot of added sugar or has zero added sugar. Foods that are less processed tend to contain no or less added sugar. They don't contain added salt. I love salt, don't get me wrong. We need salt. We need sodium as human beings. But some Americans, due to a lot of highly processed food, restaurant foods, are eating too much sodium. But I love salt. In culinary school, they teach us, the first thing they teach you is to salt until threshold. Salt until you can't, salt until it would get right before it gets too salty. Of course, I had to like taper that back after I graduated. But that is what is, when I was in culinary school, that is what was taught. So anyway, but processed food, less sodium, and also the fats. What kind of fat was added to the food if it's in a package? Fat is good. Extra virgin olive oil, expeller pressed oils, rather than the highly refined oils. So when it's pressed, or extra virgin olive oil, if you go to Italy, they say olive oil isn't actually pressed. It's put in a centrifuge and they extract the oil that way. But there's going to be more nutrition. When you see the olive oil that has that beautiful green hue in it, those are polyphenols. Those are antioxidants. Those are part of the heart healthy benefits in that food. And then, of course, there's things like fiber, whole grains. If it's highly processed, they take off the fiber. So those are things that I look at when I'm considering, is a food, clean. Now, what clean eating is not. I don't see clean eating, I don't see it as a detox diet. I don't see it as a weight loss diet. Now, of course, you certainly could lose weight. I think everyone, it just depends on where your starting point is. But clean eating is more just about the quality of the food. There was this interesting study done about a grilled cheese sandwich. It was in a journal, a scientific journal. And what they did was they compared a white bread American cheese sandwich to a bread made with whole grain bread and real cheese, like real cheddar cheese. When the people ate the whole grain real cheese sandwich, they actually burned more calories digesting that food. So when you look at our country, which, obesity is growing, weight gain is, things are on the increase, eating less processed, more whole grain foods, it might help with that. So that's what we're talking about. So I like to focus on things that are nourishing rather than, of course, demonizing foods. I think the more we can help people and give them inspiration, we're all better off that way. This month is actually National Family Meals Month. And so that's a movement. I actually just did a TV segment yesterday with Lori Corbin on ABC. And that we taped it yesterday in Malibu in her home, and then it's going to air soon. But we talked about National Family Meals Month because the reality is people are, families are both working. Mom and dad or both partners are working. People are busy. People are not sitting around the table as much as they used to. And the studies show that families who eat more meals together reap all of these benefits. They eat healthier, 24% healthier eating when they sit around the table together just 3 days a week. Teens are less likely to do drugs. They have better relationships with their families. They do better in school. So there's all these benefits to getting these meals on the table. So in my book, I focus on 30-minute meals as often as possible. There's some 20-minute meals. I focus on slow cooker meals. I find people love slow cooker meals. You just throw those meals in there and they're ready. Some of them are actually interchangeable where you can do either one. Sheet pan dinners. I try to focus on ingredients that you can find at one grocery store rather than running. That's a complaint I've heard from moms is, oh my gosh, I had to run to 3 grocery stores just to get the ingredients for that recipe. So I love shopping at, of course, the gourmet markets, but I really strive to shop, especially when I'm developing a recipe, is at the stores that most families are shopping at. So I know I can find that ingredient and I don't have to go to 3 stores to buy the ingredients. Okay, so I will get started with some recipes. Why not? And I'm actually featuring 2 recipes that you enjoyed. The first one is for the Zoodles. So I wanted to, so for those of you who have not made Zoodles before, zucchini noodles, I wanted to show you how simple. So when Zoodles first started, becoming popular, I was kind of like, oh, it's another food trend. Like I'm like, oh, I love pasta. I'm not going to make Zoodles. But then my husband came home one day. Watch out. When my husband goes shopping, you just never know what he's going to come home with. So he went to Sur La Table and for something, I don't even remember what, and he came home with this. This is a handheld spiralizer. So I was like, oh, okay, great. Like, are you going to use that? And it just kind of sat around in the pantry for a while. And then one day I was just, well, let's give it a little try. So, and then I found out I love this. It's so fun. So, and they're delicious. And I don't look at it as, now, if for people who want to use this as a pasta replacement, I think that's great. If you enjoy doing that. I'll eat pasta and Zoodles together. That's what I'll do. So the way you use this, I'll just do a quick little demo for those of you who haven't done this before. So you just take your zucchini, you just stick it on here. There's little blades inside there. And then all you do is spin it. So what happens is, here, we'll just do this. That's a protective mechanism. I'm a chef. I'm going to remove all the protective mechanisms. Except for the mandolin. I do not mess around with the mandolin. You do not want to mess around with that. So you get these gorgeous Zoodles. And these things will just keep on going and going and going and going. And they're just fun. Now, you can I've tried different things in this one. Now, there are the Zoodles that were made for lunch today. There are gadgets, of course, where you plug them in and they will spiralize everything. I mean, you can buy these spiralized now. So we'll take that one off. But yeah, you can see how long these noodles are. I mean, they're gorgeous, right? Yeah. I did try to put a carrot in here, and that was it was a little too firm for that, but you could use it in other mechanisms. So we'll get this heat going. Down by like where you see the gorgeous cliffs and the blue water. And we did a cooking class, and I found out about the cooking class through somebody I knew that visited there, and they're like, oh, the chef was so amazing. So I emailed the chef, and he said, well, I'm not doing a class, but I know this lady. It was like this agritourism restaurant / farm / bed and breakfast they were about to open. It was like multi-generational, and it was amazing. And she didn't do spiralized zucchini in Italy. What she uses the very thinly sliced zucchini. And she, of course, like basically deep fried it in olive oil, and it was amazing. So I just took those flavor ideas with the mint and the vinaigrette, and I went from there. Okay, so what I do here, and this is another little trick. When I was in Italy, the chefs that I've taken classes with there, I took another one in Lucca on another trip, and I found that some of them don't necessarily chop up the garlic and put it in there. They just smash it and then toss it in. And it's, of course, for busy families, I love that tip because it's just less time. So we're just really, and it's not overly garlic, even though, I mean, I love garlic. So this is nice and hot. So we add some oil to the pan. And I use extra virgin olive oil in most of my cooking, unless I'm really cranking that heat where I don't want it to burn. Then I'll use, oh, there must be a little water in there. That's okay. It's good for YouTube. It's good for TV. That show that I've learned a lot from that show on Indie Style that we watched earlier. I dared to open a champagne bottle before this segment because I was afraid to open it. He's like, but you open it on the segment. I don't care if it hits the lights. I don't care if it hits somebody in the back. That's great TV. So anyway, if you ever decide to do not, all the action, wait for the segment. There was another thing that I used to do. I can't even remember. Anyway, I always open wine and champagne on air now. I never would dare to do it before. So there goes the action. So I'm just going to saute that gently. I just have a couple garlic cloves in there. And then we'll add our zucchini. And what's happening now, we don't want to brown it too much. We're just letting the flavor of the garlic infuse into the oil. I think the point of that TV story was if it spews and spatters and smokes and fires, that's actually way better for TV than just sitting. Actually, my first TV segment ever, my pan was not preheated because, of course, I wasn't familiar with stovetop, and I added the salmon to the pan in the oil, and it just sat there. It was just like, it was you want it to be like pss, 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 and like releasing steam, and it just like, and they closed in on the salmon, and it just happened. So that was my very first segment. Okay, now I know, get those pans really hot so you hear, you see, you smell, and there's a lot of action happening. Here's my tongs. All right, now with this zucchini, you do not have to cook it very long. It does not take much at all because it's going to cook down really fast. Just like when you cook baby spinach, you know how, I mean, literally baby spinach, I will add it to the pan, give it a stir, and I take it off the heat pretty quickly. So instead of having like mush, it's almost like kind of fluffy cooked, kind of like a fine dining restaurant. You know, it's not smushy. It's like almost fluffy cooked, if that makes sense. But it doesn't need much heat. And then I'm adding a little salt. Okay, so when it comes to salt, yes, I'm a dietitian, but yes, I'm also a chef. So I put salt in my recipes. I find, now keep in mind, I have to do nutritional analyses on every single recipe because, oh gosh, everyone wants, not everyone, but there are people that want to see the nutritionals. So I do it for every recipe. So it's kind of like I have to show what's under the skirt. I have to show the milligrams of sodium in my recipes. So I find about a quarter teaspoon, when you're cooking with whole foods that don't have added salt, I find a quarter teaspoon is usually perfect. Sometimes I might want to add a little more salt, but then the person eating it can just add their own salt. And then, you know, adding that acid. So the acid in this dish is red wine vinegar. And for our viewers at home, I'm sure you all know this, or for our viewers at home, so red wine vinegar, you always want to have an acid in your recipes. That is what elevates that dish to, is what, if you're trying to do a restaurant quality meal and it's like missing that special something, it's probably acid and salt. But those two things are going to add balance to the dish. And then mint is another ingredient. Now you could of course use fresh mint. Fresh mint is gorgeous in this. For the home cook though, I in my book I always have the dried herb and then also the fresh herb option for people that don't want to commit to buying a whole package of fresh. But of course fresh is amazing in this as well. It smells good. All right, so that is basically how you make this. So just in that small amount of time, these can maybe use a little more heat or a little more, maybe another minute. So I'll just let those go. But some of them, when they're still a little standing up like that, they just need another minute. So that is how you make the Zoodles. Give you those. Oh, did I not put all this mint in? There we go. We'll add some more. Why not? All right. And then, of course, you can flip these around because that's way more fun. Okay, so these look good. And then we'll plate this in a nice little shallow bowl. Look at those nice things. Now, you could have leave them long like that because, of course, they're so fun to eat. And they look pretty when they're plated, but then you can fork and knife it when you're ready. They do start to break up a little bit too when you cook them. They get soft. And then try to remember to take out the garlic unless you want to surprise somebody. But that's the Zoodles. Oh, wait, I don't want to burn your hair. I'll just give you that. There you go. Thank you, Ashley. All right. So now the next recipe is my chicken Parmesan. just do a little swap here. Now the chicken parm, I mean, I love chicken parm. Actually, it's funny. I don't ever order in restaurants because I like mine. But this is just lighter. So instead of having thank you, that we can put that pan right here too, actually, that'd be great. Instead of having the thick, heavy breading on it, I've just come to love my version. So I think the one you had today had almond flour. Could any of you tell? I think I wasn't sure if we had any gluten-free or grain-free eaters. So I think we might have made this with almond flour. When I make it at home, I use whole wheat flour. So it's getting that fiber. I like how the oil fries that grain just a little bit. So what we do here is we pound this out. Oh, could I get a little plastic wrap? Just so I don't end up with chicken all over me. So I pound this out. And actually a trick that I use at home, I'll put it in a produce, those plastic produce bags. It's just easier to clean up. But here we'll use some plastic. Thank you. Oh, here, I'll just take it. Thank you. So the pounding out is actually so important because, first of all, I love chicken thighs. I use chicken thighs in a lot of my recipes. But for chicken Parmesan, I do like chicken breast. So I will pound this to about a 1/4 inch thickness. And it tenderizes it. It makes it cook evenly. And I just find as long as you cook it perfectly and don't overcook it, it's like juicy. Like the juices are literally like overflowing when you take it out of the pan. So you want to make sure that you pound them all, especially the way chicken breast is these days. I mean, some of the chicken breasts are gigantic. You cannot just put that into the pan for chicken Parmesan. You need to pound it out. And usually when I cook chicken, I pound. Some of them are so thick, actually, instead of pounding it, I will first cut it horizontally because some chicken breasts now are that thick. So anyway, these are really nice, nice chicken breasts that were not too thick. All right, crank this up a little bit more. And we are going to bread this. So the breading that we have is Parmesan. We have some, this is almond flour. And we have some Italian seasoning, I think, or dried basil. One of those. Either one will work. And we mix this together. I think I put salt in this too. I like to layer the layers. Now, it's funny though, in healthy cooking, now in culinary school and fine dining, we salt every single layer of a recipe. We salt the onions, we salt the next layer, we salt the next layer. But for healthier cooking, again, when I'm really focusing in on those sodium counts, I salt usually at the end because when you think about it, when you bite into something, you taste that salt. And so I want it to just hit the tongue, and then we don't have to over-salt it. Because you could easily put a whole teaspoon in a recipe of salt. But if you do the order right, you can get away with maybe a 1/4 teaspoon or a 1/2 teaspoon. All right, and let's see, I think that's about it. Okay, so we take our tongs and we just dust this in the breading. And it's just a light dusting. I mean, you can see that it doesn't take much. But almond flour is really great to use in recipes. I've been using it more and more, and it's great because it's so readily available now. When I wrote the first edition, actually, it was not that easy to find almond flour. I mean, I'm sure in LA, yes, it was, but not maybe in Indianapolis. Or even when I lived in Phoenix, it was when I wrote the book, that's where I lived at the first edition. And you couldn't just find almond flour every store. Now you can find it in every store. So I incorporated more almond flour in my recipes. But I like to use, let's see, oil. I like to use almond flour in crust recipes, like for desserts. I'll use it in breadings. I'll use it in cookies. But what's great about, I mean, almonds are so good for you. They have protein and they have fiber and they have potassium and they have vitamin E. So there's just so many benefits. So it's not that, I mean, I eat plenty of grains, believe me. I eat plenty of carbs and grains. But I think it gives you some more nutritional variety. And it also, people are looking for more options today. We've got people on the keto diet. We have people on paleo. We have people on grain-free, gluten. So I'm all about giving people options. I say, hey, you know what? If it works for you, do it. You know, I think we don't all have to be on the same dietary plan. You know, you got to do what works for you in your life. If you feel good, then great. If it works for you, do it. I have a friend who's a doctor, and he said, well, you know the saying, if it feels good, there you go. So just do what works for you. All right. Because I think I had a tennis elbow recently. And I'm like, this band thing, I think it works. He's like, well, I don't know. There's no studies to support that. But if it feels good, do it. So there. All right. So we put a little oil in here, just wafting it. I got my pan nice and hot. All right. But actually very hot. It's smoking. Here, we'll just leave that off the heat for a second. And we will put our chicken into the pan. Oh, but you hear the sizzle, so that's what we want. We don't want it just sitting in the oil because then it will not brown. And that would be very sad. We want it nice and brown. Sorry, I moved that on you. But the browning adds the flavor. Add that into the pan. Oh, and by the way, okay, this recipe was actually in my first edition, but I actually gave it a full makeover. Because again, you know, the saying, it takes 100 times to make a dish before you really know the dish. Well, after I made it a gazillion more times, I realized, you know what? I can make this from start to finish in one pan. It does not have to go through different pans and processes. So that's what I did for this recipe. And can you smell the Parmesan browning? It smells so good. All right. Let's see, what else? So we're gonna brown this. So the way I make this in one pan is I brown one side, and then from here we have our tomato sauce. Now this we made quickly in advance. All that's in here is canned whole tomatoes and salt. If you use good canned whole tomatoes, you don't necessarily have to simmer a pot of marinara sauce. A lot of the flavoring is already in here. So just take those canned tomatoes, add some salt, and blend it up. You could also just use jarred marinara. I use that too. Make sure I look for, again, simple ingredients: tomatoes, onions, herbs, olive oil. Doesn't have to have added sugar in it. I think the better the quality tomatoes, the better they're gonna taste, right? Okay, now you can smell that it's browned. So I'll flip these over. And you can see a nice browning happening. That is what we want. And then we'll add the tomatoes to the pan. I'm going to turn this heat down a little bit just so it doesn't splatter everywhere. And that's, you know, you want to do that at home too. Let's see. So I just add the tomatoes to the pan. And I kind of spread it around there because you want to be at the end. This is in the shot. I love how they shot this one. But I like to show off the chicken, so I mostly just put the chicken kind of around it. And I mean, the browning on the other side is happening right now, but it's good when it finishes in the oven. Of course, I'm a dietitian, so I'm going to find a way to sneak a vegetable in. So what I do here is, this is spinach that's been, there are different ways you can do this. Now, of course, this spinach is, this was blanched, I believe. Really busy home cooks, they can just buy that bag of baby spinach, microwave it in the bag if they want to. squeeze out a little water, and put it right on here. So when I'm making recipes, I'm always thinking about the number of pans I use. I mean, I don't want to stand around doing too many. Put my kids to bed, and it's like a 3-hour process. Has anyone figured out a way to make that process slower or faster? I was like, why does it take so long to get my kids to bed every night? Garner has opinions on that. Actually, she has a book. Well, she's read a book. I won't say it on this video, but it's about getting your kids to go to sleep, and you'll have to Google that. So anyway, so I'm putting the spinach on there. We take our mozzarella. We just pop that on there. You know what? I think, Ashley, we could use maybe a lid or aluminum foil. So this is, at home, you would put this in the oven. But see how I'm using a oven-proof handle? So this whole pan can just go right in the oven. I've cooked this in an iron, I want to say ironclad skillet. That is not right. Yeah, an iron skillet. What was that again? I don't. Cast iron. Oh, you know, I have these things that I do where if I can't think of the phrase, I just make up something and I'll just pop that in there and see. Okay, perfect. So at home, you would put this in the oven anyway, but we will let it simmer off here. And you could cook it stovetop too, but at home I would stick this in the oven. But then we let this go for, about, I don't know, 10, 15 or so minutes. And then you can see the picture in the book. You saw it, well, you enjoyed it today. It's just melty, it's complete. You've got your protein, you have your vegetable, you have your fruit from the tomato, you have good fats. I mean, you really have all of the components right there. So that make the chicken Parmesan. So this is simmering away nicely. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so a little bit more about the different recipes that you find in this book. Now, the inspiration for these recipes, people always ask me that, like, where do you come up with all these ideas? And so I shared some of them. Some is from my travel. Some is from when I was a private chef. Some of it is literally, this probably sounds funny, but some of it, I could be like eating like frozen chicken tenders. Not that happens very often, but let's say you're having, fast food chicken tenders. I'm like, man, those taste good. Like, what do they put in those? So sometimes I will literally look at packaged food ingredients and figure out a way to make it healthy and baked instead of fried, and figure out how to just make it healthier and easier for the home cook. So they stem from all different things. Sometimes when I'm dining out in restaurants, like there's some salads in here from restaurants that I've dined at. But again, it's always just about streamlining, using ingredients that the home cook will be able to easily get, and ingredients that are ready in a very short amount of time. So I hope this presentation you found helpful. I hope you'll consider me as a resource. I mean, I love working with everything: clean eating, family recipes, nutrition trends, new diets that people are into. Those are all of those topics. I love diving into the studies and seeing what carries weight and what can help people just eat healthier in a short amount of time, but of course, deliciously.